have to give you, being a lawyer, I will have to not just give you a slight bit about myself, which introduction has already happened, but also just say that what you're hearing is not a particularly authorized version, or at all an authorized version. I will be discussing briefly projects that are in various stages of existence and development. One of them is current, is ongoing. This is the IP-NFT and IP token model by Molecule, which is a Swiss company, and their associated entities. And this is something that is already placed. Documents and smart contracts are made available, and you can access them in GitHub and on Molecule's website, so that's live. There's also a project I will briefly mention in the end, which is close to my heart, which is in the area of longevity as well. But none of this is something that I'm authorized by these organizations to talk about. These are just my personal thoughts. So firstly, I wanted to tell you a little bit about decentralized science and to even raise the question, do we need, as much as you would be convinced that we need decentralized finance, do we need also decentralized science? And in fact, what is it? What are the benefits of decentralized science? We already have traditional science, and traditional science comes with some of its problems. These are first and foremost problems of funding. Scientists would always tell you when you speak to them that they don't get enough funding. So that may be a question of the kind of funding they get. Is it funding available for basic sciences, basic scientific research versus applied research? What is the direction in which the scientists are being asked to work? Are they working within public institutions, within private institutions, within perhaps non-governmental institutions? And one important aspect of this is there too much comfort in public science or even in private science? And therefore the problems that are being addressed are not the most impactful ones, but are the problems that perhaps bodies that award funding and members of the scientific professions are themselves keen to tackle, which will lead to more incremental as opposed to revolutionary steps in science. So that's one of the alleged problems with TradSci. There's also problems around how do you deal with the data. Science must be based on data as much as artificial intelligence must be based on data. And so how do we accumulate that data, make it available, avoid silos? There's also been a replicability crisis. I won't say more about that, but you can look it up. So the ways in which decentralized science might be able to help are the contrary to what I've just mentioned. So it could potentially provide more funding from novel sources. So there are countless individuals and organizations out there holding perhaps token or other digital assets that could fund such projects, and they could do so in a way that is public, that is on a public blockchain, that is observable, that allows the involvement, the decentralized involvement of multiple individuals, bringing multiple experiences and ideas. That also, of course, connects to the usual voting mechanisms. However, a more interesting way is that by providing, particularly in a smart contract context, a setting where intellectual property rights or other scientific related assets could be both seen but also effectively traded against, that might enable even more funding. And also the data will potentially be provided in a more structured, standardized way, which then, again, should accelerate science. So speeding things up, I think, is one credible benefit, potential benefit of decentralized science. It will become clear that as a share of total science, this kind of science, decentralized science, currently is very, very small. It's much smaller compared to, let's say, DeFi versus TradSci, but potentially promising. Some of the benefits that are suggested may be, however, benefits that need to be looked at with more attention and more care, and they might not be as easily achievable as it might seem. So as a lawyer, I do need to be a little bit skeptical, and hopefully all of you are wearing your critical thinking hats whenever you look at DeFi or DeSci projects. So looking first at the molecule projects that I mentioned, and once again, to clarify, I'm not a member of that organization. I'm not particularly authorized, at all authorized by them to speak on this. I'm just commenting on what's publicly available. Unfortunately, this is probably too small for you to read, but the Molecule has published two models. One is their model for an IP-NFT, and I will explain what they mean by that. And the other one is what they call an IP token. So the NFT first. This NFT is one that will be issued, or has been now issued, in two projects in connection with two contracts and one smart contract. The smart contract bit you can inform yourselves about directly. The contract bits are what I wanted to look at more specifically. One is a sponsored research agreement. Now, what is this? This is the agreement between the sponsor, in this case, potentially an organization that is set up in order to fund a particular scientific project. When I say scientific, by the way, please read not just basic science, but potentially applied science, which can be done as part of a company. So think about a hardware startup or a biotech startup, something that potentially has a lot of intellectual property as its asset. And it is therefore in need potentially of a lot of funding. Science can be done and must be done as part of such deep tech companies. So if somebody wanted at a very early stage of such a company to fund it, they might enter into a sponsored research agreement where they agree to fund, and in exchange they agree to acquire certain intellectual property rights. So this may be rights in relation to confidential information and know-how. They may be, if there are already patents in existence, they may cover patents. These are things, these are the assets on which such companies are built, right? So those are, by agreements, it is agreed that they will be, in exchange for the funding, they will be held, or rights to them will be held by the sponsor. And then the second agreement is an agreement to assign that to whoever is the holder of the IP-NFT. And whoever is the holder of the IP-NFT, of course, that's the business of the smart contract. So you therefore connect three things. You connect the assets, mainly in the form of intellectual property and related contractual rights, including, for example, rights to data, to a sponsor, and you then give that sponsor, or you rather give the rights to the NFT that's been issued, that's been minted, to a holder in due course, effectively creating almost like a tradable instrument. So there is, if you can see it, a extract and a link to the website where this information can be examined in more detail. There's also what they call an IP token. And that first part that I've already described, the IP-NFT, I think works very well. And it provides potentially for that aspect which we discussed, which is the ability to draw more funding and also combining patent rights with rights to data in one instrument, which I think is very interesting and very valuable. Where I'm less sure that there is a genuine product, quote-unquote product, is on this second IP token. This gives fewer rights to its holders than the IP-NFT, at least on the analysis that one is able to conduct of it. And we will have to see how these things operate. As I say, there are so far 2 projects that have been, as far as I'm aware, that have been funded using this. Each of them has issued tokens, including the IP token that is tradable. These tokens have positive values. So on CoinGecko, you will see that they haven't crashed. There is some interest in them. And so the market will tell us how valuable they are. But it seems to me that the softer rights, and I go in this slide in some detail as to why I think they're softer, are probably valuable more in a softer sense. Now, I also wanted to tell you about another project, which is as yet has not reached that level of sophistication, but is related. And this is closer in a way to my heart. I'm involved also with the foundation called the Vitalism Foundation, which is currently planning and conceiving of this project. But I'm, again, not speaking, I'm not telling you anything that is particularly an authorized statement. These are just my personal thoughts on this token. By way of background on this, this is all about longevity. And you might think of longevity in different ways. You would have heard, I'm sure you're all following Brian Johnson and what he does online. And I'm sure you would have heard of this buzzword in the last several years. But it's all about the science of the diseases that appear because of the accumulated biological damage with time. And so this extract from the Vitalism presentation tells us that it's aging that's killing us, in the sense that 80% of diseases are to do with aging. And that's also, in the US, it's responsible for 39% of the expenses in the US federal budget. Indirectly, because these are the costs of healthcare, the costs of pensions. And these costs arise because of the fact that we develop diseases as a result of these processes of aging. The diseases that you're familiar with, or the majority of them, are such diseases. On the other hand, science is available. In the last 100 years or so, scientists have been working on these topics. In the last 30 years, there's been significant progress. For example, you will see on the left in this slide the C. elegans worm, a very favorite creature of biologists. And Cynthia Kenyon, a US scientist, 31 years ago, was able to demonstrate that she could triple the lifespan of this worm just by changing one of its genes. This was just a proof of that concept. We're not yet there for humans, but it shows that a lot is possible. And so, thinking of what happened with COVID vaccines, there was, of course, huge funding, and there was, of course, a very quick development of vaccines. That funding came both from private sources and from public sources. And what happened was that governments often pre-purchased en bloc. They bought the future, almost like a crowdfunding aspect of government work. Both the European Union and other major governments, the United States, Canada, etc., they all bought up the future possible supply of vaccines. So the idea here is to develop a token which allows for the future longevity treatments to be accessed. If you recall, in the case of sorry to go back, in the case of vaccines, it was governments agreeing with makers of vaccines that if they developed vaccines, if those vaccines were approved for public use, then those governments would have access rights to them. And so a similar concept for those innovative drugs may be something accessible in a tokenized, decentralized system as well. And these are my contact details. I'm reachable on Telegram. I'm also reachable on X, and of course by email, which is kamen.shoylev@New Balkans Law Office. New Balkans Law Office, of course, is our Bulgarian law firm of which I'm a managing partner, and there are approximately 15 of us in Sofia and several of us in London ready to help you.